Hi, Dr. Versalati here, and in this screencast we're going to talk about segmenting oral speech data. So here we have a transcript of learner language. This transcript, having a transcript is great. It helps us look at the language rather than just listening to the audio. And when we can look at it and see it in the written state, we can analyze it. But in order to consider the complexity of the language sample, such as the mean length of utterance, the amount of subordination, to look at complexity, we need to segment the data into sentence level units. As you can see, it's not obvious from the transcript where the sentences begin and end because there are no sentences. It's not written. Sentences and capitalization and punctuation are all conventions of written language. Oral language doesn't have that. So why do we care about the complexity of the language? Well, it makes a difference if a learner is creating all simple sentences or if the learner is able to include coordination and subordination in their language. That would be more complex language, and that's something we would want to consider when looking at learner language. Okay, so Foster, Tonklin, and Wigglesworth in 2000 published a paper that described the problems with using the methodology for written language samples, which are like T units, and they proposed a sentence level unit for spoken language, and they called it the analysis of speech unit, which we're abbreviating as AS units. So how do we do it? Well, it's mainly a syntactic unit. We're going to look at the syntax, the clauses in the sentences. Now, in English, clauses have a finite verb, and the finite verbs can be marked with tense and aspect. For example, she walked is marked for simple past tense. They are walking, marked for progressive aspect. We have eaten, marked for perfect aspect. Also, finite verbs can be marked with subject-verb agreement, right? Like she walks, he smiles. Of course, we have to be careful because subject-verb agreement is only for third person singular. If I said I walk or you walk or we walk or they walk, there's no marker for those subjects. It's only third person singular. Just to clarify, non-finite verbs cannot be marked for tense and aspect or subject-verb agreement. And the example here is in the sentence is she likes to walk to school. Walk is a verb, a verby word, but the to walk is an infinitive, and you can see that likes is the verb that's marked, and to walk, even if we put the sentence in past tense, it would not be marked for past tense. She liked to walk. The walk to walk would never change. Same with she likes walking to school, the gerund. Okay, so when we're looking at AS units, a good strategy is to look for main verbs marked for tense and aspect. Or, since it's learner language, they would be expected to be marked with tense or aspect or subject-verb agreement. Of course, learners may not mark that, but would we expect that verb to be marked with subject-verb agreement or with tense? There is a caution here with this strategy of looking for verbs. In some learner data, the AS units may be missing the copula, the so-called linking verb, so they might not have any verb. And this is something we have to watch out for because in some languages, the copula is not required by the grammar. So for instance, in English, I would say, I am a teacher, but in other languages, we might just say, I teacher, or of course, the equivalent in that language. Okay, so we're back to this example. we're going to consider the syntax. So let's think about the clauses that we see here. Looking at the very first one, we see that maybe this might be considered an AS unit that does not have the copula. The story is about this picture. Of course, the determiner, the article, is missing, but it's possible that that is an AS unit. If the indication here that there's a pause after that, or the intonation might also give us some information whether or not we should consider story about this picture as an AS unit. Okay, so let's move on to clauses. We know that there are independent clauses, coordinated clauses, and dependent or subordinate clauses. And let's look at the complication with coordination. Sometimes, especially in speech, speakers tend to use a lot of coordination, and they do this to connect their ideas or to maintain fluency, and also to express that they're not finished with the speaking, right? They might be still holding the floor, and one way to do that is to keep connecting the ideas. So a speaker might say something like, I woke up and then I had breakfast and I got dressed and brushed my hair and then I drove to Muncie. And that in spoken language, that is much more normal or accepted or typical, but of course in written language that would be one big run-on sentence. So again, we want to make when we segment oral language, we want to split it into sentence level units. We wouldn't want to put all that there. So what is the solution? Well, an independent clause is going to be a noun phrase subject with a verb phrase, and if it should be in their own AS unit if it's an independent clause, even if it's coordination. So looking at this more closely, how would you segment that hypothetical example? Well, it would be something like this. I woke up, and then I had breakfast, and then the next AS unit, the next utterance would be, and I got dressed and brushed my hair. Now, notice in this one, there is an and connecting the two verb phrases here, right? Because the brushed my hair is sharing the NP subject, the noun phrase subject I. So that's going to be the same AS unit. And brushed my hair doesn't work on its own. And then I drove to Muncie. But again, we have to give another caution here. Some languages do not require an NP subject for grammaticality. So a learner might say something like, my hometown is nice, is safe, place, I like it, and you can see that the it or my hometown is not repeated here. In this case, I would be more inclined to separate my hometown is nice and then have the next AS unit to be here without an overt subject, because, as I said, some languages that's not required. And notice there's no coordinate conjunction connecting those. So that's some evidence of why you might want to do it that way. Okay, moving on to dependent clauses or subordinate clauses. Adverbial, relative, and complement are possibilities. We're going to focus on the subordinate clauses. So we can see that there are, for instance, there's the subordinate conjunction who for the relative clause here. How can also be indicating of a subordinate clause. But I want to focus on some words that can function either as a subordinate conjunction or serve another function in the sentence. For instance, before, after, until, since. In the sentence after lunch, I took a nap. After lunch is just a prepositional phrase. However, after I ate my lunch is a subordinate adverbial clause. Why? It's because it has its own noun phrase subject and its own verb phrase. And then I took a nap would be the main clause in both of those. So another thing to look out for is the word because. In writing, the word because functions as a subordinate conjunction, creating a subordinate adverbial clause. I love this course because I'm learning so much. However, in spoken language, because may function more as a transition word. So if a learner said something like, he doesn't see the tiger, and maybe there's a long pause, because he takes a nap, that long pause might mean that because is more functioning as a unspoken, I say this because he takes a nap. He doesn't see the tiger. I say this because he takes a nap. And of course, the learner might not say, I say this, right? After the long pause, they just might explain to the listener with the word because. So we have to look at that. Here's another example. I have a big family because I have 5 siblings. It was kind of crazy. Here, the because, if we just look at the syntax, it's not clear if I have a big family because I have 5 siblings belongs together, or maybe it's because I have 5 siblings, it was kind of crazy. So we're seeing a little bit of a problem of using only the syntax to segment oral language. We're also going to have to pay attention to the pausing information and intonation. So that's something to consider. In Foster Tonklin's and Wigglesworth's article, they also said to exclude, not count, repetitions, self-corrections, and false starts. So when the learner says he, we're just going to consider the last one, right? We're not going to consider the other one. And self-corrections. So here, the story about the man, the strong man. So to me, this sounds like a correction. So, and with the audio, you can kind of find out as well. But you can see that with a correction, we're just going to go with the strong man. And false starts are when the learner starts something and then completely changes the entire topic without any connection between what was started and what was finished. Okay, so the AS units based on Foster Tonklin and Wigglesworth are mainly syntactic units, but independent clauses should all be with their dependent clauses, all the dependent clauses with its independent clause, but no compound sentences that we would see in writing. And any relevant information we should use. Pausing, intonation. If there's a long pause, consider whether that subordinate conjunction is really functioning just as a transition word.